was the kind of Sunday morning that felt like it belonged in a postcard. The small town of Meadow Creek basked under a soft golden sun. Lawns were trimmed, coffee brewed in quiet kitchens, and the scent of fresh-cut grass mingled with the chime of church bells. Families dressed in their best walked up the white steps of Trinity Baptist Church, exchanging hugs and handshakes, laughter blending with hymns echoing from the open windows. It was peace. Or at least it looked like peace, but not for Hunter. Hunter wasn't like the other churchgoers. He was a German shepherd with years of canine training under his collar, a dog whose instincts had saved lives, unearthed danger, and sensed what most humans never could. That morning, his handler, Deputy Sarah Miller, expected a routine patrol around the church. Nothing more than a quiet shift before heading home for lunch. But Hunter had other plans. As the congregation settled in, as Pastor James Foster stood at the pulpit with his familiar, comforting smile, Hunter froze. His ears pricked, nose twitching. Someone, had stirred the air in a way Sarah couldn't smell or see, but Hunter could feel it, deep, unsettling. At first, Sarah tugged gently at his leash, murmuring a soft, "Easy, boy." But Hunter didn't ease. He didn't blink. He lunged, his bark cracked through the sanctuary like lightning. Heads turned. A child whimpered. A hymn died mid-note. All eyes landed on the dog clawing furiously at the wooden floor in front of the pulpit. And Pastor James, his smile suddenly faltered. Just for a moment. Barely noticeable, but Hunter noticed. The bark grew deeper, more insistent. His eyes locked on the pastor like he was reading something behind the skin, behind the collar and the holy words. Sarah felt the hairs on her neck stand up. This wasn't a dog misbehaving, this was a dog warning. "Down, Hunter," she commanded again, but even her voice had lost its edge. Hunter didn't move. His body was rigid, a coiled spring barking as if it wasn't the pastor standing there, but a lie. Then a whisper behind Sarah. Ruth, one of the oldest churchgoers, her voice barely a breath. "I've said it for years. Something's wrong with this place." The sanctuary fell under a spell of silence. What had begun as a peaceful Sunday morning was unraveling, quickly, terribly. Hunter pawed harder. Pastor James's hands trembled slightly, then steadied. And still, no one truly. But in that moment, Meadow Creek would never be the same again. The room was still, frozen in the kind of silence that feels like it could shatter at any moment. Hunter's bark had stripped away every layer of comfort and ceremony. The congregation, moments ago humming hymns and bowing heads in prayer, now stared wide-eyed at the German shepherd who refused to calm down. His claws scraped against the old wood with desperation, his growls rising like thunder in a storm no one had seen coming. Pastor James Foster remained at the pulpit, hands resting on the podium, but the warmth in his eyes had drained. His smile, that familiar beacon of small-town reassurance, was now stiff, rehearsed, cracked. "Please," he said, voice raised just enough. "Let's not let a dog steal the peace of this morning." But it was too late for peace. Hunter was no ordinary dog. He didn't bark without reason. He didn't growl unless danger was close. And now he was locked on Pastor James, like the man himself was the danger. Sarah tightened her grip on the leash. Her years on the force had taught her when to trust her gut and her partner. And Hunter, right now, was speaking with everything he had. "Down, Hunter," she said again, her tone sharp but quivering beneath. The leash went taut as the dog pulled toward the pastor, barking so ferociously it echoed against the stained glass. Parents stood gathering their children. A baby wailed in the back pew. Tension pulsed in the room like a second heartbeat. And still, Hunter barked. Then he did something no one expected. He dropped his nose to the floor and began digging. Right, at the base of the pulpit, gasps rippled through the room. Ruth stood from her pew, clutching a weathered Bible to her chest, her voice trembling. "I knew it, I told you. There's something under there. something that's never belonged. Pastor James took a step back. His hand trembled before he clenched it into a fist. "This is unnecessary," he said. But his voice was thin, breathless. Sarah felt her instincts screaming, something about his reaction. His fear didn't match a man caught in a misunderstanding. It matched a man who was about to be exposed. "Pastor," she said, her voice low, controlled. "What's under this floor?" James said nothing. He stared at her, then at Hunter, then past both of them as if searching for an exit. Sarah's radio crackled quietly at her hip, but she ignored it. All of her focus was on the scene in front of her, on the dog who wouldn't back down, and the man who suddenly looked like he might run. "Please, folks," James tried again, louder now. "Let's return to our worship. This is God's house." "Then why's your God's house hiding something?" someone shouted from the back. A middle-aged man in a plaid shirt, eyes narrowed. "Why's your dog losing his mind?" James didn't answer. Hunter barked again, shorter, sharper. The kind of bark he used on drug busts, the kind he used when someone was lying. Sarah looked up at the pulpit. The paint on the floor was worn from decades of sermons, but now she saw something else, scratch marks, faint, as if something had been pried up before. Her gut twisted. She reached for her radio. "Unit 3, we may need a warrant at Trinity Baptist." "You don't need a warrant," James interrupted suddenly. His voice cracked like thin ice. Sarah turned to him. James's face was pale. Sweat beaded along his forehead despite the morning chill. "It's just old storage under there," he said. "Nothing important. No one's been down there in years." Hunter growled. That's when Sarah made her decision. She turned to the congregation, raised her voice with the calm authority of someone who had dealt with threats before. Just never. Ones wrapped in stained glass and scripture. "Folks, I need you to calmly exit the building. We're going to investigate further, and for everyone's safety, I need the room cleared." There were murmurs, protests. But then Ruth stood, her voice firmer now. "Let them look, we've lived in the dark too long." That did it. People began filing out, some silent, others whispering angrily or fearfully. James didn't stop them. He just stood there, shoulders sagging as though the weight of something ancient had finally settled across his back. Once the church had emptied out, Sarah knelt beside Hunter. He was still growling, but more focused now, his nose pressed to a seam in the floor. "What are you trying to show me, boy?" she whispered. She pressed her ear close to the floor. Nothing, no creaks, no sounds. But the wood was thinner here, almost hollow. She stood and turned back to James. "I need access to whatever's beneath this floor." "There's no access," he said. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Then we'll make one," she radioed again. "Daniels, bring a crowbar." James closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were distant. Like he was somewhere else entirely. "You weren't supposed to find them," he muttered. Sarah froze. "Find who?" she asked. But James didn't answer. He walked slowly toward the back of the sanctuary, his steps heavy, every movement weighted by something he could no longer deny. Hunter barked once sharply. Sarah turned back to the floor. She ran her hand along the edges of the boards. Beneath her palm she felt a thin seam, barely visible but real. Daniels arrived with the crowbar, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. "You sure about this?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer. She just nodded. Daniels wedged the crowbar into the seam. The floor groaned, and then with a loud snap, the board came free. What rose from beneath wasn't just dust or mildew. It was a smell, faint but unmistakable. The smell of rot. Hunter barked again, backing up slightly but never taking his eyes off the hole in the floor. Sarah knelt and shined her flashlight inside. There was a staircase, old, narrow, steep, leading down into the dark, and now there was no turning back. The smell intensified with every inch the floorboard gave way. It wasn't overpowering yet, just enough to make the hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stand straight. Hunter backed up slightly, his tail stiff, ears high, eyes locked on the darkness below as if he could see something no one else could. Daniels pulled up another board. The wood creaked like a reluctant confession, revealing the mouth of a narrow stairwell, choked in shadow and dust. Sarah switched her flashlight on, its beam slicing through the gloom. The staircase descended at a sharp angle, the steps warped and worn with age. There were cobwebs, broken bits of plaster, and scattered hymnals that looked like they'd been tossed aside in a hurry, or abandoned. Sarah looked back at Pastor James. He was sitting now, slumped into a pew like a man who'd lost something, far more than just control of the room. His eyes were distant, barely blinking, his lips moving in silent words, prayer or regret, Sarah couldn't tell. "We're going down," she told Daniels. The younger officer hesitated for only a second, then nodded. "I'll go behind you." Sarah unclipped Hunter's leash. The dog moved forward without hesitation, nose low, body alert, every step measured. Sarah followed, her flashlight beam bobbing along the narrow staircase. Dust swirled in the air like whispers. The temperature dropped with every step. By the time they reached the bottom, Sarah was holding her breath. The basement was large, wider than she'd expected, but low-ceilinged. Crates and old church furniture were stacked in forgotten piles, chairs with broken legs, moldy choir robes, bent brass candlesticks. But Hunter ignored all of it. He went straight to the far wall. Then, without warning, he barked, once, twice, and began digging at the floor. Sarah rushed to his side. The wood underfoot was soft, almost spongy. Old, water-damaged, possibly rotten, but it wasn't the kind of rot that came from time alone. It smelled of something else, something organic, something dead. Daniels arrived, face pale. "Jesus," he muttered. Sarah pulled her gloves tighter. "Start prying." Together they pulled up more floorboards. Beneath them was dirt, not concrete like the rest of the room. Loose, freshly packed earth. Sarah dropped to her knees and began brushing it away. Her fingers caught something almost immediately. Fabric, delicate, lace-edged. A scrap of cloth, like part of a nun's habit. Stained, torn, and then bone. Small, pale, human. Sarah jerked her hand back, breath catching. Daniels froze. Hunter let out a low, sustained growl, pressing his nose to the earth as if urging them to keep going. Another bone appeared, then another. Daniel's voice cracked. "What the hell is this?" Sarah didn't answer. She knew. This wasn't just an old basement. It wasn't storage. It was a grave. Daniels marked the perimeter as Sarah stood slowly, heart pounding. Her flashlight shook in her hand as she swept the beam across the basement. It caught on something else now. Something in the far corner, partially covered by an old hymn book. She walked over and knelt again. Another piece of cloth. She tugged gently, revealing a small, rusted locket with a broken chain. The metal flaked. In her gloves. Inside was a faded photo of a young woman, her smile small and shy. She wore what looked like a nun's veil. Sarah's breath froze in her throat. Daniels joined her, his voice hoarse. "Who buries nuns under a church?" "No," Sarah said quietly. "Not nuns." She pointed to the size of the bones. "Some of these are children." Daniels stepped back, visibly shaken. "Jesus." Sarah turned slowly toward the staircase. Pastor James now stood at the top, silhouetted against the dim light above. His voice drifted down, hollow and resigned. "You weren't supposed to find them," he said again. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She stepped toward him. "Who are they?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, slow and defeated, leaving her in the darkness with Hunter and a truth too monstrous to fully name. They spent the next hour carefully lifting floorboards, uncovering more remains. Every few feet, another fragment, another scrap of cloth, another life lost and hidden. Hunter led them each time, barking only when he stopped at a site. His precision was uncanny. He never hesitated. The coroner, Dr. Ellis, arrived within the hour. A gruff man in his 60s, Ellis knelt beside the bones, his face pale as he brushed dirt away with gloved hands. "These have been here a while," he murmured. 10 years, maybe more." Sarah nodded, her thoughts spinning. That timeline matched too perfectly. James had arrived in Meadow Creek around then, but James hadn't buried 10 people alone, not in secret, not without help. There was more to this. There had to be. Ruth appeared at the top of the stairs, her silhouette stooped and fragile. She descended slowly, each step measured like a reckoning. Sarah helped her the last few feet. "You said you heard voices," Sarah asked softly. "What else?" Ruth stared at the uncovered bones with hollow eyes. "I heard crying at night," she whispered. "Sometimes singing like lullabies. I thought it was just my mind. Everyone told me it was just old pipes, wind in the walls. But it wasn't. It was them." She looked Sarah in the eye, voice cracking. "And I think they were trying to be heard." Sarah turned toward the wall where Hunter now scratched again. His bark was different. Urgent, desperate. Daniel swung his flashlight toward the bricks. Something about the pattern was off. Too clean, too new. Sarah knocked gently. Hollow. "Get a sledgehammer," she ordered. Daniels returned quickly. The first hit echoed through the room, the second cracked mortar. By the fourth, bricks fell inward, revealing a small sealed chamber. The smell hit instantly, worse than before. Death, mildew, rot. Inside were bundles of cloth, stacked like forgotten laundry. Sarah stepped in, unwrapping one slowly. Inside was a crucifix, a rosary, and a leather-bound journal. The pages crackled as she opened it. On the first page, written in careful script, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I have broken the vow. They know. They must be silenced." Sarah's stomach turned. Behind her, Ruth whispered again, "Beware the shepherd who hides the wolves." Hunter sat beside her, still, eyes locked on the chamber. The truth wasn't just buried here, it had been protected, and now it was waking up. Outside, the church was now a crime scene. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind, casting long, wavering shadows across the gravel lot. Meadow Creek, the town where nothing ever happened, had become a vortex of flashing lights, hushed voices, and disbelief that clung to the skin like humidity. Sarah stood near the steps, arms folded tightly, eyes on the man who once baptized her niece and gave the Easter sermon in perfect, polished prose. Pastor James Foster now sat on the tailgate of a police cruiser, hands cuffed behind his back. His glasses were askew, and his head hung low like a puppet with its strings cut. Hunter sat beside her, unmoving, watching, always watching. Sarah stepped forward, the crunch of her boots on gravel sharp in the silence between sirens and murmurs. "James," she said, voice level but edged with steel, "we need to talk." He didn't respond. "Who are they?" she asked again. "The women, the girls, why are they buried under your church?" He finally lifted his head. His eyes were hollow, bloodshot, and full of 1,000 ghosts. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Sarah took another step. "Like what?" "They came to me," he whispered, "years ago, from another parish. Said they were sisters, that they were on a mission, helping women escape abuse, addiction, the streets. They called it sanctuary. They needed shelter. They needed faith." "And you believed them?" Sarah asked. "I wanted to," he said. "They spoke like saints. They prayed with fire. And the first girl they brought in, she looked so broken, so afraid. I thought we were doing good." Sarah's fists clenched at her sides. "What happened to her?" she asked. James's voice cracked. She knew something they didn't want told. She tried to run. Sarah stared at him, her breath caught. "And they killed her." He nodded slowly. "They called it a purification. Said she had sinned too greatly to be saved." The words hit Sarah like a slap. "And you let them?" she demanded. "I didn't know what to do," James said, his voice small, pathetic. "I froze. I was afraid. They said they'd leave if I didn't help bury her. They said the church would burn if I let her rot in the open. Hunter growled softly. Sarah felt like she was underwater, the weight of the revelation pressing against her lungs. And the others? She asked, forcing each word through clenched teeth. They kept coming, James said. One by one, women, girls, some stayed, some disappeared. I stopped asking questions. I told myself I didn't know enough to stop it. But you did, Sarah said. You buried them. He turned his face away, unable to look her in the eye. I buried them all. Silence fell again, thick, suffocating. Behind her, Daniel stepped up, holding a report in his hand. We've got preliminary IDs on 2 of the bodies. Both missing women from towns 2 counties over. This is going wider than Meadow Creek. Sarah nodded slowly. Yeah, I figured. She turned back to James. You protected them. These women. These murderers. James winced. They were believers. They thought they were saving souls. No, Sarah said coldly. They were covering their crimes with psalms. He didn't answer. Ruth approached quietly from behind, her shawl wrapped tight around her frail frame. Her eyes were sharp, despite the lines of age. You told me it was just the wind, she said softly. When I said I heard voices. You told me to pray harder. James closed his eyes. Sarah turned to Ruth. Why didn't you push harder? Say something louder. Ruth's lips trembled. I tried. Lord knows I tried. But no one listens to an old woman when she says the walls whisper, and people trust a pastor more than they trust a memory. Sarah felt her throat tighten. This wasn't just murder. It was community-enabled silence, a shared blindness no one wanted to name, and it wasn't over. Hunter barked sharply. Sarah turned. His nose was pointed back toward the church, his tail stiff, his body tense. She followed his gaze. The building loomed against the darkening sky, no longer a symbol of salvation, but a vault of secrets still waiting to be cracked open. James shifted behind her. They're still out there, he whispered. The ones who told me what to do, they're still out there. Sarah stared at him. Where? He hesitated. I don't know. They never stayed long, always moving. But they checked in. They sent messages. Phone? Sarah asked. James nodded. In my office, top drawer, locked. She turned to Daniel's. Let's get it. Minutes later, they stood inside James's study, a place once filled with warmth, soft lamps, scripture verses on the wall, a dusty old globe in the corner. Now it felt clinical, empty, tainted. Daniels pried open the drawer. Inside, a burner phone. Sarah powered it on. No password, just a series of messages. Cryptic phrases. The sisters await your report. The harvest must be tended. Deliver the package. Usual location. Attached to the last message, a GPS coordinate. Sarah tapped it open. Her stomach turned. It pointed to an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a place most people had forgotten. But someone hadn't. She looked at Daniels, her voice ice cold. Get the team. No sirens, no lights. We move quiet and fast. Daniels nodded and made the call. Sarah knelt beside Hunter, clipped on his harness. You ready? She whispered. Hunter licked her hand once, then turned toward the door, muscles coiled, ears high. Outside, the air had shifted. The stillness before the storm, and Sarah knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The convoy moved under the veil of dusk. No lights, no sirens. Just the rumble of engines low and steady, cutting through the back roads of Meadow Creek like a ghost procession. Sarah led the team, her cruiser hugging the edge of the highway. Hunter sat in the passenger seat, head pressed to the cracked window, eyes sharp and unblinking. The farmhouse came into view like a skeleton from another life, paint peeling, porch sagging, windows boarded, as if even the light had been exiled. The GPS coordinate matched. This was the place. Sarah parked down the road, motioning for the rest of the unit to fan out. She clipped Hunter's harness, knelt beside him. Stay close, she whispered. Stay Stay sharp. He didn't need the reminder. They moved as one. Boots crunched gravel. Radios clicked low. The air was thick, humming with something ancient and wrong. Sarah could feel it in her teeth. A sound drifted through the boarded slats of the house, soft, rhythmic, almost melodic, chanting. She crept closer and peered through a gap in the wood. Her heart stopped. Inside, a circle of women stood cloaked in plain robes, their heads bowed, hands clasped, voices whispering in unison. In the center of the circle was a bundle, wrapped in cloth, small, still. Then it moved, just slightly, enough to tell Sarah it was alive. She didn't hesitate. "Go," she whispered into the radio. "Now." Her boot cracked through the front door. The team flooded the space like a floodlight in a nightmare. "Police!" Voices thundered. "Get on the ground!" The women screamed, scattering like crows from a carcass. One of them, a tall woman with hollow cheeks and dead eyes, lunged for the bundle. But Hunter moved faster. He launched forward, jaws locking. On her arm, dragging her down in a snarl that shook the floor. Sarah rushed to the cloth bundle, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She knelt, her hands trembling, pulled the cloth away. A girl, maybe 7, gagged, bound, eyes wide with terror, still breathing. Sarah's throat caught. She scooped the girl into her arms. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she whispered. "We've got you." Behind her, chaos swirled. 2 of the robed women were cuffed. One tried to run. Daniels tackled her on the porch. Another sobbed on her knees, mumbling scripture through cracked lips. The tall woman pinned beneath Hunter hissed through her teeth. "You don't understand. We were saving her. You've doomed her soul." Sarah turned, her voice like stone. "No, you've stolen her childhood and now you're done." Hunter growled, a sound low and primal, vibrating the room. Outside, sirens began to rise in the distance. Backup. The real storm was coming now. Sarah carried the girl, Emma as they'd later learn, to the back seat of her cruiser. The child clung to her like a drowning survivor, hands buried in Sarah's jacket. Her tiny body shook with every breath. Inside the farmhouse, investigators found journals, rosters, symbols painted beneath the floorboards. Evidence of a ritualistic cult cloaked in scripture. These weren't rogue nuns. They were predators in prayer robes. By midnight, the farmhouse was lit with floodlights. Officers combed through every room. Reporters began to gather, whispered questions blending with camera clicks. But Sarah didn't speak to them. She sat with Emma, arm around her shoulders. Hunter curled at their feet like a sentinel. "Is she okay?" Daniels asked softly. Sarah nodded, eyes never leaving the girl. "She will be." The next morning, Meadow Creek woke to a new reality. The church was cordoned off, the farmhouse secured. The whispers became shouts, then headlines. Secret. Cult discovered beneath town church. K9 unit cracks cold case. Local pastor confesses to hidden graves. But none of that mattered to Sarah, not as much as the moment Emma finally spoke. It was in the sheriff's office. The girl had been given a stuffed bear, a blanket, and a warm meal. She sat silently for hours. Then she looked at Hunter, crawled toward him, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Doggy saved me," she whispered. Sarah blinked back tears. "Yes," she said quietly. He did. Later that afternoon, Sarah walked alone into the church basement one final time. The floor was torn up. The air still reeked of old dirt and older sin. The walls seemed to hum with things unsaid. She stopped at the center, where the first bones had been found. Hunter padded in behind her. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered. His tail gave a slow, soft wag. Sarah closed her eyes. Outside, the town was beginning to gather for a vigil. Candles, prayer, mourning. But in here there was only silence, and the promise that this would never be buried again. The sun dipped low over Meadow Creek, casting long shadows across the worn sidewalks and picket fences. The town had changed. irrevocably. Where there had once been whispers of tradition and trust, now there was silence, heavy, reflective. The kind that clings to your clothes and follows you home. Sarah stood on the church lawn, watching the vigil unfold. Dozens of townspeople, faces pale from grief, confusion, and disbelief, had gathered in a slow, silent procession, candles in hand. Prayers on lips, no longer for blessings, but for forgiveness. Hunter sat beside her, his head held high, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was calm now, but not at rest. His posture still carried tension, like he knew this wasn't the end. Only a pause. Across the grass, Ruth stood quietly with her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. She caught Sarah's eye and nodded once, an acknowledgement not of victory, but of truth finally seeing daylight. The mayor stepped forward to speak. His voice trembled at first, then steadied. "We gather tonight to remember those who never got the chance to be remembered properly, to acknowledge the darkness that grew where we should have seen light, and to promise, together, that we will never let silence bury truth again." Applause rose, soft but resolute. Some wept, others held each other tightly, as if the physical contact might keep their world from tilting further. Then came the name that echoed across the lawn like a bell: Deputy Sarah Miller and Hunter. All eyes turned. Sarah didn't move at first, but then she stepped forward, not for applause or recognition, but to bear witness. She placed a hand on Hunter's back. The claps were slow, solemn, not celebration, but gratitude. When it quieted again, Sarah knelt, bringing her forehead gently to Hunter's. She whispered something only he could hear, and he licked her cheek, in reply. Later that night, long after the last candle had burned low, Sarah returned to her office. Emma was curled up on a bench in the corner, a blanket around her shoulders and Hunter at her feet like a guardian angel made of muscle and fur. Sarah sat beside her and watched her breathe. She didn't know what justice would look like in the days ahead. The arrests, the trials, the headlines that would twist pieces of the story into something less real, more convenient. But she knew this. They had pulled the truth from the earth, and nothing would put it back. Not prayers, not power, not the lies of well-dressed shepherds. The phone buzzed on her desk. A message from state investigators. Leads in 3 other counties, survivors stepping forward. It was bigger than anyone had imagined. Sarah stood, looked out at the horizon. The stars were blinking into the sky one by one. Hunter joined her at the window. This wasn't the end, this was the beginning.